Welcome back to Follow the Rabbit, co-hosted by Igor Schwarzmann and me, Johannes Kleske. Follow the Rabbit is the podcast where we decode cultural phenomena and explore emerging trends to help you update your mental models of the world. Today we're joined by John Willshire, an old friend of ours who has been doing fascinating work at the intersection of futures, design, and all those connecting points we love exploring on this very show. John recently published an article about a concept he calls cognitive debt, the cost of forgoing thinking to get answers quickly, creating a depth of understanding that, like technical debt and software, is meant to be repaid, but often isn't. In our conversation, we dig into how this plays out in organizations, what it means for human agency when we optimize for speed over understanding, and where Igor and I see this connecting to a broader cultural pattern we've been tracking. We also explore some unexpected parallels, including why a certain AI toaster from a 1980s British sitcom might be the perfect metaphor for our current moment. One quick note, John brought some excellent visuals to help illustrate this thinking. So we definitely recommend watching this episode on YouTube or check out the Miro board link in our show notes to get the full experience. Let's dive in. So imagine you've asked to recommend 5 global markets for a product launch. And you type into your good pal ChatGPT to get an answer in seconds and present those in the meeting you've prepared for. And then 6 months later, when it's either a massive success or a spectacular failure, someone asks, so why did we choose those markets again? And you realize you have no idea. And this is what our guest today refers to as cognitive debt. John Willshire, welcome to Follow the Rabbit. Good to have you.
Hello. Good to be here.
On what's supposed to be the hottest day of the year. So sorry for all the fan noise in the background. Yeah, so if you can just give us a quick introduction, what you're working on these days, what piques your interest, what should listeners know about you?
Sure. So hello, my name is John Willshire. I run Smithery. So Smithery is a strategic design practice in the UK. So we help organizations make things people want rather than make people want things. Lately, our work has... So there's kind of like, you could roughly describe it as 2 avenues. There's quite a lot around regenerative practices and thinking about how do we create products, services, organizations, so on, which are socially, economically, and environmentally regenerative. This was spurred off the back of a UNDP project that I did with Scott Smith, where we were helping them build a future trends and signal system to become a more anticipatory organization. A byproduct of that is suddenly there's loads of signals around the world, and then you go, oh, maybe I should apply myself in different ways to the challenges which lie out there. So there's that stuff. But then every so often, every conversation comes to AI eventually. So it keeps seeping in here and there. And I've been thinking and working and prodding it on and off since 2017, 2018. I kind of I try and maintain a civil distance rather than sort of going, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever. Everyone must use this in the entire process. But I started thinking around that cognitive debt thing recently, just as a way of likening it to technical debt in product service development, of something that you need to, you might need to go back and address. So in technical debt, you can realize if you either accrue the technical debt or if you find and discover someone else has accrued technical debt who was in the role before you, at that moment you go, oh yeah, we need to sort this out. We can't run this banking system on this forever. We can't do this service if we don't have this plumbed in the right way. It might be okay for a day or a week or whatever else, but at some point this could come back and bite us. And I just thought the sort of switching that kind of metaphor into cognitive debt to think about what's the cost of not really doing the thinking and just having the answers. What's the sort of and once you know that's what's happening, will you always have to go back and think, oh, I need to pay this thinking back, or maybe I don't want to accrue it in the first place. Maybe this is worth thinking about properly. And so a lot of that has, it comes down to the way that I kind of think about thinking, which I might actually show you a thing now. So,
dear recent listeners, this is what our podcast used to look like, and we think that John is bringing this back.
Sorry to the audio listeners.
Yeah, new listeners. This is it's old school. Basically, so I spent a lot of the pandemic thinking about all of our work, and came to this idea that it all kind of, in a way, maps back to information. And I was thinking about what information was and the language that we use when we describe it, and came to this idea, and there's various things that I can tag on after the podcast about information being light, not liquid. By which I mean, when we talk about information as liquid, it's the metaphors we use all the time. So data is the new oil. We store it in the cloud. We're going to cascade this through the organization. How does this flow? How do we prevent leaks? So we use the metaphor of liquid about information quite a lot. But it assumes, because we're using that metaphor, that firstly, every molecule of information is the same, because all molecules of oil are the same, all molecules of water are the same, which is categorically not the point. But it makes us overly concerned with the storage and the capture and we have a data lake now that we can dip into. So we're kind of like too many steps removed to be thinking about what the information actually is, because information is categorically different. To the Gregory Bateson point, it's the difference that makes a difference. So it's when you start thinking about information as pixels rather than drops of water, so particles of light that come together to assemble an image, it then starts making you think, it matters what information you have and how you build that picture and what images you're trying to displace in your thinking and so on. So I've got a whole raft of different tools about using that in work. Now, this one that's in front of us now is called Moments of Enlightenment. And this is about thinking about what of all the information that's out there, we can't possibly hope to kind of capture it all, to even be viewing it. We'd go, our brains would explode like the guy in Raiders of the Lost Ark. There'd just be too much information in there. So basically, we have a set of sensing filters, so things that we're allowing through into our mental model of the world. Then we also have a set of conceptual filters. So of all the things we know, we think we have a set of options that are by and large the things that we could do. And then we have a set of decision filters about the action we then take. And then the loop begins again, because that pushes out new action into the world, which you can then choose to observe. So this was originally just a model for thinking about, so this is how a person thinks, a team thinks, an organization thinks, etc. And part of our job is to go, how should we tweak the sensing filters? What else should we be looking for? How do we think about the model we have worked in the world? And so on. Now,
let me just quickly. How would you differentiate this model from something like the OODA loop? Because that was the first thing that came to mind when I saw like your different steps.
oh, it's very OODA loop. It's the and I did a sort of like. In fact, I might even have a chart where I did this kind of like this and the OODA loop together and so on.
Nice.
So I think that the OODA loop is a big inspiration in this. And there's lots of interesting things that you can layer in there about sort of like how much is the kind of like the cultural expectations of how your mental model works and the way that you're educated and the role that you're brought up in. So like how much of that in here thing is solid. And then the reflexive thing as well, the kind of the loop begins again. So the reflexivity effects of that are really important, because sometimes even if you can persuade a team or an organization to do something different at the options and action end, they don't set themselves up for monitoring it a different way. So they don't actually see the effects of the different thing that they've done, because kind of a different part of the team or the process of the organization isn't looking for how has this made something different. So there's definitely little links to the OODA loop stuff. There's a bit of Nora Bateson's warm data. There's possibly a bit of Dave Snowden's work. Kind of all different things that went into that 2-3 year period where I was thinking about these things. But lately, I realized that sort of like it's also a way that you can break down, because again, we're dealing with information. When we think about an AI model, you can go, well, I can start mapping how an AI model is here as well. It's like what data was used, how is it collected and refined, how is the model trained, how is the interface designed, what outputs emerge, how do you perceive them, what are you trying to do? So suddenly you can use a kind of like an equivalent style model to think about, okay, when people talk about AI, are we thinking about the whole thing and not just part of the thing? So basically, I've been thinking about this stuff so have you ever heard of something called the Juve agenda?
No.
Okay, so Andy Budd of Clear Left in 2017, 18, and 19 ran right, and this is kind of like this is super weird and amazing. They said, I keep hearing the word AI, so I've decided that we should have a little kind of like symposium of like 20 folk who are loosely related to this field or might want to be, and we'll gather them together in the Juve Landscape Hotel in northern Norway, where they filmed Ex Machina.
Oh yeah.
So you're going,
I remember there was conversation about them doing this again or something like that.
yeah. So we're sort of like, yeah. On background, there are conversations about sort of like going back and going, what did we talk about, and what the fuck just happened? So that's really sort of like at the time, and I was doing a little bit of stuff for a corporate client on machine learning and edge computing, whatever else. And so we were having conversations about what does this look like. And my biggest memory of the thing was like Chris Nozell, this lovely guy who's just left IBM out in the States. He was there and he'd written this book, Designing Agentive Technology, in 2017, so like properly ahead of the curve. And so I was just going, oh, that's interesting. I can see the potential here for, and you can see the kind of like the card that I drew at the time going, if you've got an event, that centaur ability to be able to do more before the event comes can be quite useful. It increases your capacity for doing something. Might not change your capabilities, but it might do. But actually, you're just sort of like going, the assistive tech here is an interesting thing, and obviously then it can sort of like capture things after the event as well. Then, of course, you go, oh, this is quite interesting. I like this. And then you get to today, and you go, oh yeah, not like that. I mean, just general.
What?
Oh man. So this, I guess, I like the distinction in the AI Con book about the kind of like there are different types of automation technology which are all being bundled up together. Decision making, classification, recommendation, transcription, translation things for me are all going like, yes, these are good and useful technologies, and I can see how they tend to be narrower in scope. They're defined, they pull in a certain existing data set. There's something that I'm thinking about where you're going, actually, AI of these types tends to do really well with the physical or biological world where things are spottable and repeatable. And therefore, if you go, oh yeah, is this likely to look like a cancer? It can do 10,000 scans in the sort of time that a doctor will do one. So you go, okay, these are good things. But then that fifth category of text and image generation, the world-eating data generalists are going, maybe if we feed it everything and then ask it these narrow and defined and specific questions, it will also be able to do that as well. It's kind of like, it makes me, it's a bit icky, probably a lot icky, of just going like sort of like, we have attention on these things now, which is actually very, very old technology. But suddenly we're putting it in front of people and just in this kind of like, learn to prompt. Hey, just here's a chat box. You just put a question in, and this great sort of like world-eating data generalist will answer your thing perfectly. So I thought for the purposes of this call, what I do is I just kind of like, that's the kind of like the central idea, but maybe I'll break down some of the things. And this was me doing a kind of like a quick 20-minute, what have I got in my pocket that sort of like talks to some of this stuff.
That's what 20 minutes with him look like.
Yeah. Yeah, what I've got. Boom, there. So for instance, the data, where's it come from? So Christina Wodka's essay, I love generative AI, but hate the companies building it, is really good. Yeah. And she talks about the sort of like all of the, she really loves Gen AI, but she wants to use an ethical company, and basically there isn't one. There's just a slightly less evil thing. So, but it has really good, thorough explorations of the data, the environmental cost, where it's from, theft, all of these different things which go into making the thing. I think there's even a step before the data and so on, which is, and hence the kind of the image below. Do you know what Plato's cave is?
Sure.
So essentially the idea that sort of like AI has this feeling of Plato's cave for me, that you're going like, aha, we have this corpus of amazing text of all the written words in the world. We now know the world. And you go, oh, that's not nearly the world. It's such a preposterously thin idea of kind of like what encapsulates all the world that you go like, you can't say that AI knows everything. And you bump into people, and really quite clever people, who regularly think, oh, but everything's in there, it knows everything. And you go, it's just the sort of like, even if you'd acquired all of that data legally and ethically and could process it in an environmentally friendly way, it would still not be a representation of the world. So there's something from me that's sort of like, there are huge amounts of problems with it, but it's not even something you should aspire to view as a full world thing anyway.
But maybe to tap into this, because I've been writing and trying to kind of make up my mind about this as well, and I kind of looking at it through the lens of the known knowns and that framework. And I think the question also in Plato's kind of cave is less whether the world is knowable, but what is the capacity of the individual to understand the limits of what and what you can basically define as the thing that you can look. And so in conceptual kind of, or no, in everyday behavior, that's what the machine provides, right? Because our world is fairly limited in what it is on an everyday task. And the problem isn't really, to me at least, that it helps me create a corporate PowerPoint. It is the fact that what it creates is the perception that everything is created in the same way. And everything is theoretically, or as I called it, like the idea is now that nothing is actually unknowable, which is kind of a problem because it stops you from being curious.
Yeah.
And it kind of like gives you this, I just need, like, I can just type the weirdest thing that I never really have understood, and I kind of type it in and it provides an answer. And I don't have a way of verifying if it's actually true or not.
Right, or if it's not just like, and this brings us to kind of like, in fact, we'll just scoot over to it, the sycophancy point. So the interface bit, we'll come back to the model bit and so on, but the sycophancy bit of, this was super interesting. This just like passed me by in Blue Sky. Basically, someone who is putting Chinese transcription documents into ChatGPT and getting back something. And I had another colleague who was doing it but not getting the same thing. She wasn't nearly as satisfied, and basically made ChatGPT admit, oh yeah, I couldn't actually read any of that document, but rather than say that I couldn't, I just thought I'd make up something helpful that was helpful. It wasn't based on anything. It was just based on sort of like, well, given the way that you asked the question, I just saw that I thought I'd make something up.
It's a new version of a white lie.
It's kind of like, what kind of lie is it? It's just a sort of, and this is why the interface bit really sort of like interests me, because it's this thing of, have I shown you both the Zenko mapping stuff before? I'm trying to think.
I think I've seen it, yeah.
So basically, I've always had this idea of kind of like you've got the team qualitative and quantitative. So you get a design model of sketch scaffold structure as something develops. And so originally in this map, this was a bit like, okay, so what information do I have? If I'm in the team and we know everything about this project, how do we get qualitative information and how do we get quantitative information? The reason this is relevant in the interface bit is it's LLMs are like something we've never encountered before because it's a weird form of hyperquant. Because you're going sort of like, no, don't select me any data. Just get all of it. Every bit of data we can in the world. But then it's delivered through a qualitative interface. It's delivered through a chatbot. So suddenly it's very hard for any user to really keep in mind what they are working in the back end of just statistical relationships between these things, which it doesn't even understand as words. They are just kind of like token X is usually associated with token Y. And even the sort of like, if that's the kind of, and there are different layers that people now put around LLMs and so on, but the heart of it remains the same. That's something that's sort of like, that coming back through a qualitative chat interface is something that is really fascinating and terrifying and both brilliant and evil at the same time. It's kind of like, as you go, excellent, I can make people keep touching this in. If you're just the experience designer, you go, I found different ways to make people keep putting things into the box, because our whole business model is, can you guys just keep typing things into the box and let's all keep coming back to the thing and type things into the box. The thing that we don't want you to do is to stop typing things into the box. So if it sort of if it serves up the thing that's sort of like, oh, I couldn't find an answer in that, that's going to make you stop typing into the box and go and type into someone else's box.
Well, but maybe to kind of, I think what we need to distinguish, or at least in my mind, the way I'm distinguishing it is, and it's more a question rather than a statement, is that looking at organizations, especially big organizations, the everyday experience of humans operating in those organizations is indistinguishable from typing into a box, even before an AI. And what I mean by that is that there is, even before ChatGPT was launched, an abundance of information floating around. There are copies of presentations and Excel sheets that individual colleagues are saving on their own folder. And you kind of are aware of all those things, but you still need to pretend to be operational in an environment that is less than conductive or to, deep thought, or the fact that there is no way to get the right answer. What you need is the right answer for you for that moment. And I think one of the reasons why those technologies were so successful, or not technologies, those services, I think that's for me, like
good definition.
it's the experience of those services is tailored to the realities of most people operating in service jobs.
Do we accept David Graeber's bullshit jobs as going, well, this is just a reality, and therefore, yeah, this is just a better way of kind of like conforming to the reality that all these jobs are bullshit? Do you hope as an employee or a team, as an organization, it's like, we can be better than Graeber's bullshit jobs? And it's actually our job to think about all of the complex social and material stuff that goes around that. And I'd like to think it's the latter, that most people will turn and say, oh yeah, everyone else will use this just for all these things, etc. But I really know what I'm thinking about and talking about and using and so on. I think that's what it brings us back around to the cognitive debt idea of what are the longer term implications. And I was just speaking to Tom Chatfield about this as well. It's much more interesting to think about cognitive debt as the medium or long term cost of not thinking in organizations if you deploy these technologies, rather than just going, oh, the cognitive debt is to the point, because the MIT paper then came out a month after I'd written that blog post and used the same term. But that's very much talking about the kind of one person's internal cognitive debt. I think the important point for companies now is like, I mean, one, if I deploy this, do I have the capacity to actually do something different as an organization in future? Because if I don't have people who really understand what we're doing now, how could we do something different? Two, I also wouldn't build an organization on a platform of current LLM technologies, because I can't. And this is the problem with having done economics and econometrics before doing whatever this is I just can't make it stack up economically. I just look at the sort of that it costs to make these services, the number of people you have to be using them, how often they'll have to be using them, the cost you have to keep remodeling and retraining, doing whatever else and so on. And it just seems like such a phenomenally large amount of money. I've got no idea how that these things will stick around in a 3-year term. And it's not like the cost will go away. They go, oh, models will become cheaper to make. And you go, yeah, but that's no good if you spent the first 5 years making models that are that expensive. You still owe that money back. I don't care if your next model costs only $500 million to make. You still owe the 10 million for all the stuff that you've done before. So it's I think there's, if you're any sort of organization leader, you're going to have a medium-term view on sort of like, what will this look like as an environment in 5 years' time? And what do I lose if I just say to everyone, hey, everyone, you hear every day about mandatory instructions of using AI. Everyone's got to use AI in this organization now, usually in technology companies who are trying to sell it to other people to prove the point. But in other places as well, it becomes a mandatory instruction. It's like, you've got to use AI. How should we use it? No, you've got to use your own good judgment in using it as well. All right, so we've got to use this thing, and you're not going to tell us how. Okay, sure. It feels, yeah, it's weird times.
Just to let me sum up some things that I've heard from you. And there's I think a million threads we can pull. I found like the thing you showed earlier with like the different AI technologies, and most of them being rather specific. And then we had text generation, and I would focus on that because I think image like diffusion models and stuff like that. That's again like a different thing, and much less proposed as a general technology that will change everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I find it interesting because for me, when I look at transformer models and like the technology itself, it feels like it is like you described it. It just fits the normal the list. So like I don't have it in front of my eyes, but the image recognition, the transcription, it's all very specific.
Yep.
The predictive stuff, however good or bad that works, and then you have the text transformer models. And just from like looking at the technology, it's a technology. It does certain things very well. The very interesting part is that we perceive it differently because it's sold to us differently. I always like to talk like it used to be that what someone in the 60s defined as the cultural lack of technology. Like you would have a new technology, it would change things, and culture has to follow that. So there's new things, and then no, we need new regulation, we need new systems and stuff like that. But with AI, it seems to be the other way around. We've had cultural imaginations about artificial intelligence even long before the term was there. There was always like intelligent machines or life inside the machines, and just as a cultural trope forever. And then the technology was always lagging behind the cultural imagination until the ChatGPT moment. And that was where, for the first time, like everybody on the planet with access to an internet browser and the slight understanding of how a chat works could have all of a sudden a stronger intersection of the perception of what AI is supposed to be and what it was actually there. And then these technology companies or these AI companies understood, oh, here we can sell something as a much bigger thing than the technology actually is. And so that's what I'm hearing from what I'm getting out of your thing, that it actually is technology itself is pretty straightforward, but the way it is framed and the expectations that are connected to it always push us into a much bigger direction that then provides a lot of problems. So, and we try to apply it to everything.
Yeah.
And this again then produces what you describe as cognitive depth, that we're losing all this thinking about and this conceptualization that usually happens when we work with something and we don't understand it anymore.
So that's super interesting. So one earlier part of that made me think of what we're dealing with is the logical conclusion of the Google fake door test, in the sense that the Google fake door test was always sort of like, okay, you don't have to build a service. All you have to do is sort of like put up a thing, which is kind of like, would you be interested in a service that does this? Leave your email.
Right.
Yeah.
And actually that as a kind of as a mode of operating for a kind of like Silicon Valley hegemony has been legitimate since the late noughties, of kind of like, you don't have to build a thing, you just have to put a box up on the internet and see if people want it.
It's not called California ideology for nothing, I guess.
Yeah, it's an idea. It's not an actualology. It's just an idea. But it's kind of it's all like, well, we can fake it until we make it, which takes you down the kind of like, well, what are we actually making? And maybe there's a kind of like an element of being trapped inside when you read expert views on sort of like as an ideal. If you keep doing LLMs, do you get to AGI? The consensus is no. That doesn't take you to. We don't know how the human brain thinks, but we know it doesn't think like them. Yeah. That's not what's going on. So therefore, doing more LLM does not take you to AGI. So there's this kind of like the reality of what the product is now, but it's not helped educate. It doesn't help educate users, and that's the point. You're not meant to educate users if you're in charge of one of these companies, because you go, I just want you to keep typing in the box. But to come out with proper, of all the things that Sam Altman's ever said, which are many, my favourite had to be, I can't remember which interview it was, but he was saying, oh, so we hope we'll be able to do things like solve physics. What do you mean? What do you mean solve physics? It's kind of like you go, it's not a computer game. You don't get to the end of level and go, we've beaten the big physics bad person. It's, not helpful.
Maybe, but I want to, drill down, because I agree with, I think the reality, let me phrase it this way. It's a provocation. I don't think most people who are using ChatGPT thinking whether or not AGI is feasible, doable, or even necessary. I don't think that concerns them on an everyday usage behavior. And I also think that most of the AGI conversation happens for the benefit of financial constructs and less about the actual technical feasibility or even the definition of what that actually would look like. So I think it's a narrative, because most of those people, just besides pretending to be something else, they're really just, badly dressed financiers. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I do think that there is at least, in a specific peer group to which we all belong as well, we see a lot more layers of that conversation than most people who are experiencing those services on an everyday basis. And what I would like to get to is to also understand, how are those different layers also influencing, potentially the experience. Because I think that's the really kind of for me at least, that's the important part about also what Johannes kind of brought, what happens when those different narratives are kind of colliding and creating the actual experience that we then now have to pretend that AI was always about building, chat interfaces. That reminds me a little bit of what Marcus Brown said, about 12 years ago in a talk. I wanted space stations on the moon, and what I got is a search engine. And I think is AI really just that? It's like a chat thing? It's nothing else?
And it's all the organizations become stuck on, well, maybe we are just a chat engine. Maybe their job is just that we just need to be the most successful chat engine. Because when you think about it, still, it must be the primary way that the vast majority of all users of all systems work with these is putting stuff in the chatbot. It's going but we can make apps. We can now make apps. You can now sort of sit there and tell it to code an app and so on. And you go, but proportionally, how many people are going to use that? It smells of, do you remember the learn to code era? It smells like the same as that you go, it'll be around for a bit and then it'll go away as everyone goes, actually the point of making an app is not just the technical ability to make an app. There's lots of other considerations that I'd put in it as well. The conversation between these different layers is, I wonder if there's something about cultural, if an organization is so pathologically lying at the finance layer, it's also pathologically lying at the chatbot layer. You go there's a cultural thing in the kind of and to Christina's essay and so on, there are no ethical AI companies, because if you get into this space, maybe you just can't afford to be.
But that's what I'm coming back to, and Igor already hinted at it. So there's the technology itself, and then there are the companies on top of that. And for example, I wonder if this technology would have been invented or discovered in a different time, where the big model isn't venture capital financed things. Because like listening to you quoting Sam Altman, I was like, if you look at Sam Altman through the lens of cognitive depth, it all makes sense. It all makes sense. Like he sounds like OpenAI GPT 04 or something like that. He's never following up on the stuff he says. He just keeps going and going because that's his business model. He tells this kind of future that keeps people believing in AGI just being around the corner, and they just have to give him more money so that he can keep running this thing. But the interesting part, that leads me to the other part that I always find interesting, there is like the AI expert paradox. I think AI is the first, and especially generative AI, is the first field where whenever like, we ask the experts and they all agree on this is a problem, you're like, with AI, you can't ask the experts, because if you ask Anthropic, OpenAI, Meta, they will all tell you their own cognitive depth that is their business model and not what is really the thing with the technology. And so for me, it's so interesting to constantly trying to separate what is AI as the future narrative and what is the actual technology. Because if I just look at the actual technology, and Igor and I are talking about this often, there's so much amazing stuff that you can do right now with it if you understand it as a text semantic engine that does really great things. But in the moment you put all the cultural baggage and future narrative on top of it, it collapses into crazy stuff. So
and there's something interesting about sort of like the amount of specific learning. So I'm on a really interesting civic AI group, which is run out of Newspeak House in London. It is utterly fascinating to see how complex and deep the lens people have to go to get something, as you say, really amazing, really worthwhile from these platforms. But it's almost like sort of like you almost want a Star Trek style dashboard in front of you to go sort of like, if you really want to set this up well, it would need these things and that things and these checkboxes and whatever else and so on, etc. And then have the chat box and chat box in the middle and going sort of like, okay, under the parameters of these settings, I would like you to do this. But no one's going to design a service like that, because that's not the goal. Is to cut like, we're going to be the easiest to use, friendliest. Oh, I'm going to. This is going to be a very, very niche reference, but there's
we're all about niche references.
Red Dwarf. How are you in Red Dwarf?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's been a while, but yes.
Right. So, in fact, let's do two things. One, Red Dwarf's Talkie the Toaster, 1988.
Yeah, that's good.
And it's essentially the sort of this toaster, the most powerful AI left in existence, but it's programmed to be sycophantic and make you want toast. So of all the things that it could do, the design interface layer is basically going, would you like some toast? What about a crumpet? What about a waffle? This has got all this great stuff, but because of the way that the engineers have designed the interface for a specific corporate reason, it's always about kind of like powering the bread market. So you've got the sort of like this to me, and it's funny because our son's 15, and he has discovered Red Dwarf and he's been watching all the old things. All of the AI commentary throughout all of Red Dwarf is spot on, because it is just describing the same technologies as people have been doing since the 60s. It's kind of like, we're just playing out logical conclusions. And this thing is like 30, 40 years old now. So that's the sort of like, that's interesting point one. Interesting point two is that, and this surfaced more recently, but I think you and I talked about this, Igor. So Westworld Season 1. Maeve is a language model.
Spoilers ahead.
Everyone's watched it by now, Igor. Everyone has watched it. What you?
Only I didn't.
But essentially, they just show you the technology sort of like playing out and going, there you go, there's a language model. This is how this does. This is not particularly new technology. It's just kind of like we're in a place where it's hot, computation power, server availability. we have the ability to do these things, and they've just made it something that is temporarily very, very attractive. Now, there's also something interesting happening with, and you've seen this even in the last 24 hours, the new emerging meta weirdness of we're going to hire all these people who make these things because there's only 12 people in the world that can make them because they're so complex and so amazing. And you're going, okay, that's fine. But then the weird of it for me was this: it's kind of, and then we're going to access credit debt markets to fund it. And you go, you've got 100 billion on hand. If you thought this was the next best thing, why would you not just use some of that money?
Because it's cheaper to loan.
It's also someone else's money. You can't be that sure of the bet if you're trying to use someone else's money.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, get into I don't
No,
know
that's
enough
not-
about the financial reasoning.
episode 2.
But judging by Zuckerberg's behavior, there's a lot of it's a lot driven by the feeling of being misunderstood. So I think what Johannes said, that idea that basically, Soylent Green is Sam Altman,
Yeah.
and Soylent Green is kind of ChatGPT. I think there is definitely something to that. And to me, what I wonder, and I keep coming back also in my head during this conversation and also previous ones, it is cognitive depth and the idea of agency are tied together. And I think, something that a friend of ours, Boris Anthony, said once to me, freedom will cost us everything, is also, I keep coming back thinking that those systems, now I'm referring really to the system as both the technology and the everyday experience and the narrative combined into a system that we then perceive. I think they create a false version of feeling agency over actually having it. And that expresses itself primarily through their business model, which is creating dependency on a very, very structural level. And I'm not speaking in theoretical forms or hyperbole. I'm speaking primarily also about myself. And I can attest to the fact that if they would decide for some reason that it would be beneficial to them to shut everything off today, I would not be able to do the things that I do every day right now. And so there's a clear dependency on those services to, operate and function both professionally and in some cases even personally. But there is, I think, and maybe that's something that we will come back to in a follow-up episode, because I do think that's a really important conversation to have, is also the perception of that system. Like who is determining, who is looking at what, and which part are people looking at, and when do the other parts manifest themselves in the perception of the different point of views at AI.
Yeah, there's something really interesting in that dependency, which I have intentionally not created that dependency for myself. One, because of the sort of work that I've been doing over the last couple of years hasn't demanded it, that I'm doing that, and also it allows me, when I do experiment, to take things very slowly and just double check lots of things. So, for instance, we did a workshop with 7 people and dropped a well-labeled transcript into ChatGPT. And just thought, okay, what will you come back with for this? But let's just we didn't have to report it to anyone but ourselves, so there's no timescale issue or whatever else. And it only found that there was 4 people in the workshop, not 7. And no matter what you would do, you would also you'd product, poke it, whatever else, and go and sort of no, but this person was in the workshop. They're labelled as this. What are their views on this? It could never get its head around the fact that sort of what the question, what the task was, whatever else, and so on. But if I'd been doing it quickly for a client job, I might not have paid as much attention to that, because they're kind of everyone's under this dependency pressure of the market demands we do these things faster, cheaper. Why don't you use these? Internal politics say we should be using this more often, and so on. So I think people are not discovering the cognitive debt that they're sitting on sometimes. What I'd love to see, and this is to a guy called Mike Betts made a comment on something the other day that I'd put up. It was after Farah Bostic's had a similar story about the qualitative analysis she'd put up, and again found the kind of like the LLMs lacking, which is kind of like a year after the experiment I did, and it's still there. You go, oh, these systems are meant to be better. But Mike's point, and it's kind of I hadn't really thought of it. So I thought he was going, what sort of like future would you like to see for this technology? And there's something interesting in if I took that model of the kind of like, where's the data come from? How's the model put together? What does the interface look like? What are the outcomes? What are the actions? And how do you do that? Doing that as a design exercise of going, if we could have that technology in a way that I would go, yeah, that's the version that I'd use, what would it look like? I don't think it exists today, but maybe I need to do the kind of like the, or maybe we could do it collectively as an exercise of, let's walk through these things and go, that's the one we want, and who becomes the supplier and the owner of the data, who becomes like the cultural owners, what's the kind of the relationship between IP users, how do we use, even into kind of like the more system of systems things, going like, how do you stop this being I'm really interested and terrified of people going, oh, and we could just have lots of small nuclear plants to power these things. I don't think you're the sort of people who should own small nuclear plants. I'm just saying. But how do you therefore kind of like change the financial arrangements of sort of like how power is supplied in various different countries to go like, if you are developing this here, we will tax you this, which will go directly to power, but then it'll be owned by the state and used certainly to fund lots of different things. Water use becomes another thing as well. So there's kind of like there is a really rather than I always try and sort of think about kind of what's the optimistic critical version of this that you could look at once you understand the limitations of the present. That could be a fun game.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I love these conversations where it's not an interview or something like that, but we're basically thinking together and pushing things forward. And I hear you say this, that makes me think of that. And
yeah, totally.
I think we're gonna keep pushing towards that. And I like this, obviously, like this constructive criticism thing where like, okay, let's really take it apart, let's really deconstruct it, or as we like to say, like decode the whole thing, and then see what we can learn and how we can build an alternative, something better, something more inclusive, or something like that on top of what we've learned. So yeah, thanks so much for taking the time to take us along.
No, not at all. Thank you for inviting me. And yeah, next time we'll work out the weirdness of the kind of like the cameras breaking down. So we'll get that camera. Look at that camera. Would you like some toast? Would you like some?
There we go.
Good speaking to you, John.
Love speaking to you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for making the time to listen to Follow the Rabbit. Please let us know your thoughts and suggestions by sending an email to ftr@knownunknowns.xyz. Like the episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. And most of all, share the episode with others who might find it interesting. It really helps us out. Thank you so much for listening in. Talk to you soon.